Commander Zara Velfani stood at the viewing port of her ship and watched the ugly space station grow larger against the stars. And she felt nothing but cold determination in her crystalline heart. The Sirenai did not feel emotions the way other species did, and Zara had always considered this a blessing, for feelings were messy things that clouded judgment and led to poor decisions. But now her species was dying, and all the cold logic in the universe could not save them. She turned away from the window and checked her scanner one more time, and the readings had not changed since she first detected them 3 days ago. Somewhere on that grimy station called Nexus 7 was a being whose neural patterns matched Sirenai compatibility markers. And this should have been impossible, because only other Sirenai had ever shown such compatibility in 10,000 years of recorded history. The High Matriarchs had sent her on this mission with simple instructions, and those instructions were to find compatible genetic material by any means necessary, or watch their species fade into extinction within 2 generations. Zara did not intend to fail. She docked her ship in the cheapest bay she could find because she did not want to draw attention, and she wrapped herself in a hooded cloak that hid her silver skin and violet eyes from curious gazes. The station smelled of recycled air and desperation and 100 different species, all crammed together in corridors that had not been properly cleaned in years. Zara followed her scanner through winding passages and past shouting merchants and through crowds of beings who all seemed to be running from something or towards something with equal urgency. The signal led her to a cantina near the cargo district, and the establishment was exactly as unpleasant as she had expected. Dim lights flickered overhead and cast strange shadows across tables, where smugglers and haulers and people who asked no questions conducted their business in low voices. Zara lowered her hood and let her silver skin catch what little light there was, and she did not care about the stares that followed her across the room. Her scanner pointed toward a corner table where a human male sat alone with a bottle of something amber-colored and a look on his face that suggested he wanted the universe to leave him alone. This was the compatible being, and Zara felt a moment of surprise that she quickly suppressed. Humans were young as galactic species went, and they had no psychic abilities and no special genetic modifications and nothing. That should have made this one register on her equipment, but the scanner did not lie, and Zara had learned long ago to trust her instruments over her assumptions. She approached his table and studied him as she walked. He was not physically impressive by human standards or any other standards, and his brown hair was unkempt, and his jaw was covered in several days of stubble, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who had seen too much and slept too little. His clothes were worn and practical and stained with engine grease, and everything about him screamed that he was nobody important. Zara sat down across from him without asking permission. The human looked up at her with eyes that were surprisingly sharp despite the alcohol, and he said nothing as he waited for her to explain herself. "I require your services for one night," Zara said in a voice that carried no warmth because she had none to give, "and you will be compensated generously for your time." The human let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Lady, I think you have the wrong guy," he said, and his voice was rough like gravel scraping against metal. "I haul cargo and I drink too much, and that is about all I'm good for these days. You are Marcus Cole," Zara said because she had already researched him during her approach to the station. "And you served in the Terran military for 12 years before you resigned your commission and disappeared into the freight lanes." Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of his past, and Zara noted it but did not understand it. "So you know my name," Marcus said as he poured himself another drink. "That does not explain what someone like you wants with someone like me." Zara placed a credit chip on the table between them, and she watched his eyes widen when he saw the number displayed on its surface. The amount was enough to buy a new ship 3 times over. And she saw greed and suspicion and something like fear all pass across his face in quick succession. "You are compatible," Zara said, because she saw no reason to be anything but direct. "And you are the first compatible non-Serenai in recorded history, and my species requires this." "And I require this." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. "Compatible for what exactly?" he asked. And Zara could hear the caution in his voice now. "A bonding ritual," she said. And this was technically true, even if it omitted certain crucial details. "One night of neural synchronization that will allow me to obtain what my species needs to survive." She did not mention that no non-Serenai had ever survived such synchronization. She did not mention that she expected his mind to burn out within minutes of the connection. She did not mention that she had already justified his death to herself as an acceptable price for the salvation of her people. Marcus picked up the credit chip and turned it over in his fingers. And Zara could see him calculating and weighing and deciding. "One night," he said finally. "And then I never see you again, and you never come looking for me." "That is correct," Zara said. And this was also technically true, because dead men could not be found. Marcus finished his drink in one long swallow and stood up from the table. "Then I guess we have a deal," he said. And there was something resigned in his voice, like a man who had stopped caring what happened to him. Zara rose and led him out of the cantina and through the station corridors and back to her ship. And she felt nothing as she walked beside the man she intended to kill. She was Serenai after all. And the Serenai did not feel, but somewhere deep in her crystalline mind, in a place she refused to acknowledge, something stirred at the sadness in his eyes. She ignored it and kept walking. The fate of her species was more important than one broken human. And Zara had made peace with that truth long before she ever set foot on this station. Or so she told. The ritual chamber aboard Zara's ship was cold and filled with pale blue light that pulsed in slow rhythms, like the heartbeat of some ancient creature. Marcus stood in the center of the room and looked around at the crystalline structures that rose from the floor and hung from the ceiling, and he felt like he had stepped into someone else's dream. "What are these things?" he asked as he reached out to touch one of the crystals. "They amplify psychic energy," Zara said as she moved to stand across from him. "And they will help facilitate the neural bond between us." Marcus pulled his hand back and watched her with wary eyes. "You keep talking about neural bonds and synchronization," he said, "but you have not actually explained what any of that means." Zara removed her cloak and revealed the flowing silver dress beneath that seemed to be made of liquid metal. "The resonance is our sacred mating ritual," she said, and her voice carried the weight of ancient tradition. "And it involves the complete merging of two minds so that genetic information can be transferred through pure psychic connection." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "When you say complete merging," he said slowly, "what exactly does that mean for me?" Zara hesitated for just a moment. And in that moment, Marcus saw something flicker across her silver features that might have been guilt. "It means you will experience my consciousness as I experience yours," she said. "And it means our thoughts and memories and feelings will become one for a brief time." This was not a complete lie, but it was far from the complete truth. Marcus should have walked away right then and there. And some part of him knew that something was very wrong with this whole situation. But another part of him, the part that had spent 5 years running from memories that would not let him go, wondered if having someone else inside his head might finally give him some peace. "All right," he said with a heavy sigh. "Let us get this over with." Zara stepped forward and placed her hands on either side of his face, and her fingers were cold against his skin like metal left out in winter air. "Close your eyes," she said, "and try not to resist." Marcus closed his eyes and waited for something to happen. What happened was beyond anything he could have imagined. The connection hit him like a wave crashing against rocks. And suddenly he was drowning in sensations and images, and feelings that were not his own. He saw Zara's homeworld with its crystal spires and violet skies and the cold perfection of Surinai civilization. He felt the weight of 10,000 years of history pressing down on a species that had forgotten how to change and grow and adapt. Experienced the terror of a people watching themselves slowly fade toward extinction with no way to stop it. And beneath it all he felt Zara herself, cold and determined and utterly convinced that his death was a small price to pay for salvation. That knowledge should have made him angry, and later he would wonder why it did not. But in that moment, all he felt was a strange, sad understanding, because he knew what it was like to sacrifice everything for a cause you believed in. The connection deepened, and Zara began to pull at his neural patterns, and he felt her trying to extract what she needed before his mind collapsed under the strain. This was when everything went wrong. Or perhaps this was when everything went exactly right. Marcus's mind did not collapse, and instead it pushed back against her intrusion with a force that shocked them both. The trauma he carried, the guilt and grief and rage that he had buried so deep, had changed his brain in ways no scanner could detect. Years of suffering had created neural pathways that twisted and turned back on themselves, like scar tissue made of pure thought, and those pathways, shaped by pain and reformed by survival, matched the crystalline structures of Surinai. Consciousness with perfect precision, the resonance reversed direction. Suddenly it was Zara who was drowning as Marcus's memories flooded into her mind with unstoppable force. She saw the Battle of Proxima 3 through his eyes. The flames and the screaming, and the bodies of friends lying broken in the rubble. She felt him holding a dying child in his arms, while enemy ships burned the sky overhead. And she experienced the helpless fury of a man who could not save the innocent, no matter how hard he fought. She witnessed the refugee ship that he could not reach in time, and she watched through his eyes as it exploded against the stars and took 3,000 souls with it. She felt his guilt, his shame, his certainty that he should have been the one to die instead of all those others who deserved to live more than he did. But deeper than the pain, buried beneath all the trauma and loss, Zara found something she had never encountered before: hope. Not the logical calculation of probable outcomes that the Surinai called optimism, but something far more powerful and far less rational. It was a stubborn, burning belief that refused to die no matter how much evidence stood against it. It was the conviction that things could get better even when everything suggested they could not. It was the human capacity to look at a broken universe and decide to fix it anyway. Not because success was guaranteed, but because the attempt itself had meaning. Zara screamed as this alien emotion tore through her crystalline consciousness like fire through dry wood. She had lived for 300 years without ever truly feeling anything. And now she was feeling everything all at once. The resonance completed with a pulse of energy that shattered half the crystals in the chamber and knocked them both to the floor. Marcus woke first, and he stared at his hands as faint golden light danced across his skin like tiny stars being born and dying in rapid succession. His mind felt different now, expanded in ways he could not describe. And he could sense Zara's consciousness at the edge of his awareness, like a door that had been opened and could never be fully closed. Again, Zara woke screaming, and she scrambled away from him until her back hit the wall of the chamber. "What did you do to me?" she demanded, and her voice cracked with emotions she had no names for. Marcus looked at her with eyes that now held flecks of violet among the brown, and he saw the terror on her face and understood it even though he did not fully understand what had happened. "I think," he said slowly as he watched the light fade from his hands. The better question is, what did you do to us? Zara touched her own face and felt tears running down her cheeks. And she did not know what tears were or why they were happening. She only knew that everything had changed, and that she would never be cold again. The resonance had worked, but not in any way she had planned. She had come to take something from a human instead. Something human had been given to her and deep within Marcus. A seed of power that should have been impossible for his species. Three weeks had passed since the resonance, and Marcus had learned that secrets did not stay secret in a galaxy full of telepaths. The Sci-Fi Collective had detected the energy pulse from their ritual, and they had dispatched 3 Inquisitor ships to investigate what had happened aboard Zara's vessel. Zara had fled with Marcus into the outer territories, where few species bothered to travel. But distance meant nothing to those who could track psychic signatures across the stars. They sat together in the small cargo hold that had become their home, and Marcus practiced the exercises Zara had taught him while she watched with eyes that still held wonder and fear in equal measure. "You are progressing faster than should be possible," she said, as she observed him lift a metal crate with nothing but his thoughts. "And what takes Sci-Fi children decades to master, you have learned in days." Marcus set the crate down and wiped sweat from his forehead, because using these new abilities still exhausted him in ways he did not fully understand. Maybe human brains are just wired differently, he said with a shrug. That did not quite hide his own amazement at what he could now do. "No," Zara said, and she moved closer to him with that intensity she had developed since the bonding. "This is something else entirely, and I have been trying to understand it since we first connected." She placed her hand on his chest, where his heart beat with a rhythm that now seemed to pulse in harmony with her own. "Sci-Fi psychic abilities are cold and structured," she explained, "because we have spent millennia perfecting control and precision and removing all emotion from the process." Marcus nodded because he had felt this when their minds merged, and he remembered the crystalline perfection of Sci-Fi thought patterns. "But your abilities are different," Zara continued, "and they are fueled by something we deliberately removed from ourselves thousands of years ago." "Emotion?" Marcus said, because he had already begun to suspect this truth. "Yes," Zara said, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Your rage makes you stronger than any Sci-Fi warrior, and your grief gives you depths of power we cannot imagine. And your hope—" She stopped and looked away, and Marcus felt her emotions through their bond like waves crashing against his awareness. "My hope? What?" he asked gently. "Your hope makes you unstoppable," she said, "because it is not logical or reasonable or based on any evidence. And it simply refuses to accept defeat, no matter what stands against it." Before Marcus could respond, an alarm shrieked through the ship, and red lights began flashing in the corridor outside. "They found us," Zara said as she jumped to her feet and ran toward the cockpit. Marcus followed her and felt something new stirring in his chest. Something that was not quite fear and not quite excitement, but some combination of both. The view screen showed 5 ships dropping out of faster than light travel, and 3 of them bore the silver markings of the Sci-Fi Collective, while the other 2 were black vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Zara's face went pale, and Marcus felt genuine terror flooding through their bond. "What are those black ships?" he asked, even though he suspected he did not want to know the answer. "The hierarchy of silence," Zara said in a voice that trembled despite her efforts to control it. "And they are far worse than anything my people could send after us." She turned to face him with eyes that held thousands of years of accumulated fear. "They are an ancient order that has existed since before recorded history," she explained rapidly, "and they maintain the balance of the galaxy by suppressing any species that develops too quickly or evolves too dangerously. And they are here for me." Marcus said, because he could feel the attention of those dark ships focused on him like predators fixing on prey. They have been monitoring humanity for centuries, Zara said, and they placed genetic limiters in your species, long ago, to prevent exactly what is happening to you now. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest at the thought that his entire species had been deliberately held back by some ancient conspiracy. They kept us weak on purpose, he said. And golden light began dancing across his skin as his emotions fed his power. They kept you contained, Zara said, because they feared what you might become if allowed to evolve naturally. And now they have come to eliminate the threat before it spreads. The communication system crackled to life, and a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere filled the cockpit. Human designated Marcus Cole. The voice said with cold authority, "You have been classified as an Omega-level threat to galactic stability, and your termination has been authorized by the hierarchy of silence." Marcus looked at Zara and saw her fear. But he also felt her determination through their bond. She had meant to kill him 3 weeks ago, and now she was ready to die to protect him. "Can we outrun them?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. "No," Zara said. "But perhaps we do not need to." She took his hand in hers and squeezed tightly. "Show them what you can do," she said, "and show them why they should have feared humanity long before now." Marcus closed his eyes and reached deep within himself, past the careful control Zara had taught him and into the raw, churning ocean of emotion that powered his abilities. He thought of the friends he had lost and the people he could not save, and the child who had died in his arms. And he let the grief and rage and guilt flow through him without resistance. Then he thought of hope. That stupid, stubborn human belief that tomorrow could be better than today. And he felt his power surge beyond anything he had ever experienced when he opened his eyes. They blazed with golden light. The hierarchy ships fired their weapons. And Marcus reached out with his mind and grabbed the energy bolts out of space and hurled them back with interest. 2 of the black ships exploded before they could even understand what had happened. The Sirenai vessels broke formation and fled, because their crews could feel the psychic shockwave rolling off this human, and they wanted no part of whatever he had become. But something else happened in that moment. Something that would change the galaxy far more than the destruction of those ships across human space. On 100 different worlds and stations and ships, other humans suddenly gasped and clutched their heads as dormant potential awakened within them. Veterans who had survived terrible wars felt power stir in their scarred minds. Survivors of tragedy and loss discovered abilities they should not possess. Anyone who had suffered deeply and rebuilt themselves found that their rebuilt minds now held capabilities beyond anything human. The hierarchy's genetic limiters, carefully maintained for millennia, shattered like glass under the weight of the war. Came faster than anyone expected, and it came without mercy. The hierarchy of silence had maintained their control over galactic evolution for longer than most species had existed, and they did not intend to let one human ruin everything they had built. 300 warships gathered at the edge of Terran space, and each ship carried weapons designed to eliminate entire worlds. The Galactic Council received an ultimatum from the hierarchy, demanding that humanity be surrendered for termination, and the cowards chose neutrality rather than resistance. Most alien species simply looked away and pretended not to see what was happening, because the hierarchy had taught them long ago that challenging the established order meant extinction. But the Sirenai collective fractured. Down the middle, half of them sided with the hierarchy because tradition demanded obedience, and their fear of change outweighed their fear of extinction. The other half looked at what Marcus had awakened in Zara and saw the salvation they had been Seeking for generations, civil war erupted among the silver-skinned telepaths. And for the first time in 10,000 years, Cyrenai-killed Cyrenai Marcus stood on the bridge of a ship that had been given to him by the Cyrenai rebels. And he looked out at the fleet of human vessels that had gathered to defend Earth. They were not military ships for the most part, because humanity's navy was small and outdated. Compared to the ancient powers of the galaxy, these were cargo haulers and mining vessels, and passenger liners and anything else that could carry weapons and willing bodies. And among those willing bodies were thousands of newly awakened humans whose powers grew stronger with each passing day. Zara stood beside Marcus as she had stood beside him since the resonance, and their bond had only deepened in the months since that first connection. "They outnumber us badly," she said as she studied the tactical display, "and their technology is thousands of years more advanced than anything we have." "I know," Marcus said, and he turned to look at her with eyes that still held those strange violet flecks among the brown. "But they have never fought anyone like us before." He reached out through the bond and let her feel what he felt when he connected with the other awakened humans. It was chaos and noise and 1,000 different emotions all crashing together like waves in a storm, but beneath the chaos there was something else. Something that made Zara's breath catch in her throat unity. Not the cold precision of Serene collective thought, but something warmer and messier and infinitely more powerful. These humans were not controlling each other or forcing synchronization through rigid discipline. They were simply choosing to stand together. And that choice created bonds stronger than any psychic compulsion. "We fight differently than you expected," Marcus said with a small smile. "And we fight like humans." The hierarchy fleet began its advance, and Marcus broadcast a message to every ship in his ragged armada. "I am not going to lie to you," he said, in a voice that carried across space through the psychic network they had created. "Because we are probably going to lose this battle, and many of us are going to die today." He paused and let them feel his honesty through the bond. "But I am also not going to tell you that dying is acceptable or noble or worthwhile," he continued. "Because death is never those things, and anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you something." He felt confusion rippling through the fleet as they wondered where he was going with this. "What I will tell you is that there are some things worth fighting for even when you know you might lose," Marcus said. "And there are some things worth dying for even though dying is terrible and wrong and should never be necessary." He thought of the child who had died in his arms, and the refugees he could not save, and all the loss he had carried for so long. "Our families are worth fighting for," he said. "And our children and our friends and our lovers and even the strangers we have never met, but who deserve a chance to live and grow and become whatever they might become." He felt his words resonating through the bond, amplified by the emotions of thousands of awakened minds. "The hierarchy wants to keep the galaxy frozen in place forever," Marcus said. "And they want to make sure that nothing ever changes and no species ever grows beyond the limits they have set." He let his rage flow through the connection, and he felt it merging with the rage of his fellow humans. "I say we show them that humanity does not accept limits," he declared. "And I say we show them that the universe is not their garden to tend. And I say we show them that hope is stronger than fear, and love is stronger than control." The hierarchy fleet opened fire, and the battle for Earth began. It was not a clean fight or a pretty one, and Marcus had not expected it to be. Hierarchy weapons tore through human ships like paper, and for every enemy vessel they destroyed, they lost a dozen of their own. But the awakened humans fought with something the hierarchy had never encountered, and that something was pure stubborn refusal to accept the odds. They threw themselves into impossible situations and somehow survived. Through sheer determination, they linked their powers together in ways that should not have worked but did because they believed they would. They pulled wounded ships out of firing lines and shielded civilian transports with their own bodies and died by the hundreds while screaming defiance at the ancient order that wanted them erased. Zara fought beside Marcus at the center of the storm, and she had never felt anything like the emotional hurricane that surrounded her. She had been cold her entire life, and now she burned with borrowed human passion that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The hierarchy flagship moved toward Earth with the largest weapon in its arsenal, charging for a killing blow. And Marcus knew that no conventional attack would stop it in time. He looked at Zara, and she looked at him. And through their bond, they both understood what needed to happen. "If I do this," Marcus said, "I do not know if I will survive." Zara took his face in her hands the same way she had done during the resonance. "Then I will make sure you do," she said, "because I did not discover what it means to feel just to watch you die." She pressed her forehead against his and opened herself completely through their bond. "Take everything I have," she said, "and take the genetic template of my species that I carry within me, and use it all to end this." Marcus tried to refuse because the cost was too high, but Zara would not let him. "My people were dying anyway," she said with tears streaming down her silver cheeks. "And at least this way our end will mean something." Marcus drew her power into himself, along with the ancient genetic knowledge of the Sereni, and he felt his abilities expand beyond anything he had imagined possible. He reached out toward the hierarchy flagship with the combined power of human emotion and Sereni precision, and he tore it apart from the inside out. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, and with it, the hierarchy's invasion shattered. But something else happened in that moment of supreme effort, and Marcus felt a wave of energy ripple outward from him across the stars. It was his hope and Zara's sacrifice and the desperate determination of every awakened human in the fleet, all merged together and amplified beyond measure. And when it touched other species across the galaxy, something miraculous occurred. The limiters the hierarchy had placed in 100 different species began to break. The chains that had bound galactic evolution for millennia started to crumble everywhere, on 1,000 different worlds. Marcus found Zara in the wreckage of the command deck, and her silver skin had faded to pale gray as her life force drained away. He gathered her in his arms and felt their bond flickering like a candle in strong wind. And he refused to accept what seemed inevitable. "Stay with me," he said as golden light danced across his hands while he tried to push energy into her failing body. "You do not get to leave after everything we have survived." Zara smiled up at him with a face that had learned to show emotion only after meeting him, and she lifted one weak hand to touch his cheek. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. "And I was wrong about all of humanity. You can tell me all about how wrong you were after you recover," Marcus said. But his voice cracked as he felt her slipping away through their bond. "I thought your species was primitive and useful only as tools." Zara continued as if she had not heard him. "And I thought emotions were weakness and feelings were obstacles to be overcome." She coughed and silver blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. "But you showed me that feelings are what make existence worthwhile," she said. "And you showed me that hope is not foolishness, but rather the greatest strength any being can possess." Marcus felt tears running down his face, and he had not cried since the day he left the military. "You cannot die," he said, "because I have spent 5 years running from everything I felt. And you are the one who made me stop running around them." The battle had ended, and the hierarchy fleet was in full retreat, but something strange was happening across the galaxy, and Marcus could feel it even through his grief. Thousands of minds were reaching out toward him through the psychic network he had created. And they were not all human Sereni who had felt the wave of energy he released, were connecting to him with wonder and gratitude. and he sensed that the cold logic they had cultivated for millennia was giving way to genuine emotion. The Valkyrie, an ancient species that had stopped dreaming centuries ago because the hierarchy had suppressed their dream consciousness, suddenly found themselves flooded with visions of possibility. The Mindweavers, telepaths who had been forced to suppress all feeling to avoid hierarchy detection, rediscovered what it meant to love and fear and hope. Species after species awakened to abilities and emotions they had forgotten they ever possessed. And all of them traced their awakening back to the psychic shockwave that had exploded from one human at the moment of victory. And now those awakened minds turned their attention to Zara, and they offered what help they could give. Serene genetic knowledge flowed through the network, combined with Valkyrie healing techniques that had been lost for generations. Mindweaver telepaths helped stabilize her fading consciousness while human emotion poured into her like sunlight after endless winter. Marcus felt all of this happening and understood that he was no longer alone in trying to save her. The galaxy was trying to save her because in freeing them from the hierarchy's limitations, Marcus had created bonds that transcended species and history and ancient enmity. He had shown them that connection was possible, and they were choosing to connect. Zara gasped as the combined energy of 100 awakening species flooded through her, and her gray skin began to shimmer silver once more. The genetic template she had sacrificed, the last preserved blueprint of Serene biology, did not return in its original form. Instead, it merged with what Marcus had given her during the resonance, creating something new that was neither fully human nor fully Serene. She opened her eyes, and they were no longer pure violet but swirled with gold like galaxies being born. "What happened?" she asked, and her voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. "The galaxy saved you," Marcus said with wonder in his voice. "And I think we might have saved them too." In the months that followed, everything changed. That the hierarchy of silence did not disappear, but their power was broken beyond repair. Too many species had awakened to abilities they could no longer suppress, and too many beings had tasted freedom to accept change again. The Galactic Council reformed itself with new members and new principles, and humanity took its place among the elder species, not as conquerors, but as catalysts. Marcus and Zara traveled from world to world, helping newly awakened species understand their emerging abilities and showing them how to integrate emotion with precision. They discovered that they were expecting a child, and the scanners could not determine what species the baby would be because it seemed to be something entirely new. "Are you afraid?" Zara asked one night as they watched twin suns set over an alien ocean. "Of what our child might become?" Marcus thought about the question carefully before answering. "I spent so many years being afraid," he said. "And I was afraid of my memories, and afraid of my feelings, and afraid of connecting with anyone because I might lose them." He put his arm around her and pulled her close. "Then you came along and used me and manipulated me and almost got me killed," he said with a smile that took any sting from the words. "And somehow that was the best thing that ever happened to me." Zara leaned into him and felt their bond humming with warmth. "I did not know how to feel before I met you," she said, "and now I cannot imagine existence without feeling." She placed her hand on her belly where their child grew. "Whatever they become, they will have the best of both our peoples," she said, "and they will have something the galaxy has never seen before." Marcus nodded and thought about the future that stretched out before them. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy because that was not what humans did best. Instead, they had connected with it and changed it simply by being what they had always been. They had offered hope to the hopeless and emotion to the cold and belief in tomorrow to those who had forgotten what tomorrow meant in the years to come. Beings from across the stars would speak of the human named Marcus Cole, who had changed everything, and they would give him a title that would echo through history: the first bridge because that was what humanity had become. A bridge between isolation and connection, between cold logic and warm feeling, between the way things had always been and the way things could be. And it had all started with one night. One ritual, one Serenai, who thought she was using a human only to discover that the human had awakened something in her that changed them both forever. Marcus held Zara as the sun's finished setting, and stars began appearing overhead. And he thought about how strange and wonderful existence could be. She had needed a mate for one night, and what they found in each other had changed the galaxy for all time above them. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was celebrating what they had accomplished, and somewhere in the depths of space, 100 awakening species looked toward tomorrow with hope they had not felt in millennia, because humanity had taught them to hope again.